familiar with King and King's curriculum know, there were 8 hours of Bible in that core. There were 4 hours in the Old Testament and 4 hours in the New Testament. The administration asked that the core be cut, and eventually it came down to 4 hours of a Bible class. This was actually, even though I was part-time and an adjunct about 4 years ago, this was something that was a real problem for the Bible and Religion department because how do we deal with this? How do we get some of the same teaching regarding the Old Testament and the New Testament? How do we communicate that material? And then B, how do we actually reach a new student population that is becoming more diverse? I started part-time at King in '03, and at that time most of my students were I think it's fair to say that they were Christian, a lot of them from mainline Christianity, in particular Presbyterian or the Reformed worldview. And now as we approached 2010, 2011, the good news is that King had grown exponentially, and with that came a very diverse population. So now I would say that a good number of my students are faith-based, some within the Reformed tradition and some not. But a lot of our students, I would say probably, and this is just a guess, but 30 to 40% of our students do not come from a faith tradition. According to my thinking and the philosophy and the religion department's thinking, these students are very important to us also. So the dilemma then, 4 years ago, and the dilemma now is how do we remain true to our tradition and our heritage, our Presbyterian Reformed tradition, and yet how do we remain open to our students? One of the things that I'm deeply committed to is that all of our students not only have a liberal arts education, or at least some aspect of liberal arts education, but that all of our students at some point in their academic career at King, that they have an understanding of what a Christian worldview is. That's what Foundations of Christian Faith and Practice is all about. Essentially, we take two ideas very seriously. One is, of course, the centrality of the gospel of Christ. And so even though we spend half a semester in the Old Testament, which I think is very, very important, we spend half a semester in the Old Testament, but eventually that is leading and that is moving toward the New Testament and, of course, Christ. And so one of the major positions that we take is it's very important that our students not only know the facts about Christianity and the facts about Christ, but also that they understand that a Christian worldview is not a Christian worldview without the centrality of Christ. The second idea that is very important is we want our students to have a basic Bible knowledge. If we are in the Reformed tradition, which we of course are, then it's important that the scriptures are prominent and preeminent. And so again, we want our students to be very competent in a Christian worldview, which includes the content of the Old Testament that they receive, and then content of the New Testament. And at the end of this class, we want them to know basic content for a Christian worldview. However, I want my students to be educated and informed. I want this to be academic. Not only do we want passionate faith, but we also want reliable interpretation of the scriptures. So those students who come from a Christian worldview, we want them to be very articulate. If we're going to go out and transform culture, then we must be educated and we must be prepared for this. But then even the students who say do not come from a Christian worldview or are antagonistic to a Christian worldview, we still want them to be educated in a Judeo-Christian worldview. We still want them to be able to articulate this. And so again, this, in my mind, goes back to our tradition at King. What it means for us to be educated, what it means for us to be informed, what it means for us to be academic, but also what it means to be passionate in our faith. So even though now we do not have a course that is exclusively dedicated to the Old Testament and the New Testament, Foundations of Christian Faith and Practice, half of the semester is Old Testament, half of the semester is New Testament. And also we want our students to be able to think theologically based on those facts.
There are a few things that make the Foundations class different than anything else on King's campus, and really we think different than anything else that's being offered in the country. Foundations is a class that covers from the Old Testament all the way through to the New Testament, and it's broken up into 12 themes. I won't bore you with all the themes, but there are things like God creates out of the chaos, God is not Santa Claus, Jesus is the Messiah, 12 themes that are really integral to the Christian faith, and we walk the students through those 12 themes throughout the course of the semester. Paired with each of those themes are an essay and activities that go with each of the themes. So in class on Tuesday, Don lectures on the theme for that week, and he walks them through scripture that goes along with it. He compares the theme to other religions, and then the students have an essay to read at home. Usually they write a critique on that essay during the week that's turned in on Thursday, where they respond and reflect and really critically think about the theme and the essay that they were given to read. Normally, under normal circumstances, would be really hard to do with a group of freshman students, 18, 19 years old that just came out of high school, that might not be able to really critically think about these kinds of hard spiritual truths. But what we found that works is to use what we call peer mentors. And these are students who have already passed through the Foundations class, who have really succeeded and done really well in the class, and they come back later as peer mentors to lead the current students through Foundations. We have a ton of really great students that come back and work with the current students to progress them through the class. And so usually on Thursdays, Dawn teaches for half of the class for 45 minutes, and then the students walk from the FAB, from the Women's Auxiliary Building, to the dining hall, and they meet with their peer mentor at the big round tables. There's about 10 students per peer mentor, and they talk about the critique, they talk about the essay, and they go through discussion questions. And as the TA coordinator and administrator, I get to hear some of the great conversations that they're having every week in the dining hall. It's amazing to hear students talk about how a movie relates to God, or how they can see that the church isn't handling things like sex trafficking and the foster care system well in the United States. Really hard things to talk about, and they're talking about things like this every single week in Foundations. It's incredible to see. So these are kind of the things that make Foundations different, things like the peer mentor system, things like the specialized workbook, the large community in the FAB, and then the small learning communities in the dining hall. All of these things work together to make a unique learning experience for our freshmen at King.
Dr. Dawn Hudson's class has affected me greatly as a Christian. I came to King already with a Christian background. I grew up in church, and I've always considered myself a religious person. But Dr. Dawn Hudson's class entirely changed my mindset on Christianity in a positive way. I never viewed God and Christianity the way that he did, so hearing his mindset on what he thought of Christianity and how it has affected him personally entirely affected me too.